me first salute the students who had the vision and determination to bring us together. I think it's a real sign of hope that we have critically minded students to ensure that we have these kinds of forums with serious discussion. I know they've also aligned with various peace organizations. I know we got Sister Irene and others as well, but Fernando and Mike Lim and others, I salute you. I'm always not just delighted, but elevated when we have these kinds of forums where we can go at each other intensely, critically, mediated with the respect and the civility. I want to thank my dear brother Sean Williams for serving as MC. I want to plug his book, his magisterial text, The Rise of American Democracy, Jefferson to Lincoln. I think that's very important because it reminds us of a time in which this grand institution had such deep complicity with vicious legacies of male supremacy and white supremacy. If it were not for the kind of critical energy unleashed by people in the street, the best of elites in government, and citizens who were part of the Princeton community, we wouldn't have the colorful group that we have now, as well as men and women and so forth. It's important to keep that in mind. I think Brother Sean is absolutely right. This is a perennial issue. Every generation has to wrestle with the too cozy relations at times between not just institutions of higher learning, but elite institutions of higher learning, like Princeton, that plays a disproportionate role in shaping the elites of the nation, whether they deserve to or not. They do. Now, I'm here because my dear sister and colleague, Anne Louise, I wasn't there to hear your remarks. I'm sure I would have been outside protesting, but I was outside of the country. I was outside of the country at the time, but that's fine too. That's part of Princeton tradition too. And dear Brother Mark, I look forward to our conversation. I'm here because I am fundamentally committed to a Socratic Princeton. Intellectual integrity, intellectual civility, but also intellectual maturity. And it means then that the institutions and ourselves will forever fail because the standards are such that when we're honest, when we talk about our will to truth, are we willing to be truthful about Princeton's will to truth? What does it hide? What does it conceal? When I look at the spectrum of debate, not just with Joe Wilson, I'm concerned about the university across the board. Every figure who comes to this institution must be subject to sustained Socratic questioning and scrutiny. I used to invite my dear brother Edward Said. First thing we say is, at least an hour for dialogue. At least, Edward said, I can't wait. He's a Princeton man, class of 1957. Right? The best of Princeton in so many ways. Socratic to the core. So I was disturbed, for example, when I was there in California the other day and I saw Sister Hillary Clinton. I said, where's the question and answer? Let's go after Sister. She's at Princeton. Anybody who comes to Princeton better be ready for some serious Socratic scrutiny. That's what we stand for. If Chomsky were to be here, let's go at Brother Noam. And it's very important to keep in mind, though, that when I hear you say two sides, I get a little leery here, because there's more than two sides. See, Biden is still too spineless for me, but I mean, that's just an orientation. I want him here, bring him here, scrutiny. Let's hear Pat Buchanan's critique of American imperialism. Let's hear Trauma Johnson's critique of American empire. Let's hear Neil Ferguson's defense of the empire. That's what we're here for. But we also know that once the words are in the air, there's also action on the ground in terms of the cross-fertilization. Need not always be concerned conservative. It is today. And therefore, when we bring people in, we're going to ensure, especially those critically minded Socratic students, you are going to have a voice to go at these conservative elites.
Amen, brother.
No matter what. Yes, liberal elite, similarly so. I would like to see more thoroughly leftist folk who are in the wilderness, but whose voices will become more relevant as the empire becomes more crisis ridden. And I would also like to see more right-wing reactionary folk. Even more right than the Republican Party. Because sometimes the anti-modern reactionary folk has some truths to tell. Even as usually I think they're wrong, but that's all right. But it's the broadening and the deepening of the dialogue. We are about paideia here in the Greek sense, right? The formation of attention. That shift from the frivolous to the serious, but a shift from the comfortable to the uncomfortable. Anytime we leave a form, like this form here, if we leave comfortable, if we leave without being settled and unnerved, we're not being true to the Socratic Princeton that I'm committed to. And so I again want to congratulate those who brought us together. I look forward to a robust and uninhibited dialogue, not just about the remarks, I think part of it, but also the larger issue Brother Sean talked about earlier, and the various ways in which we can empower and ennoble each other to be more Socratic, more honest, more courageous, and in the end, be more truthful, because the truth is always painful in the Socratic tradition. And there's some painful truths that need to be disclosed about Princeton's relation to power.
Good evening. Nearly all of you are going to remain here at Princeton in the days to come, but though I have interesting memories from Princeton, I'll be with you for just a few hours, and I'll be going back to Imperial Washington tomorrow. So I ask you in the few moments we have together to please allow me to give you my perspective in a clear and admittedly a very pointed way. In a sense, I'll also be summarizing what I've learned in about 200 trips abroad since my own student days. I realize many of you are not going to agree with or even accept what I have concluded, but I thank you in advance for the opportunity to be here tonight to join these two distinguished persons who play such important roles at this exceptional university and, in fact, in our country. Though what happened a few years ago on 9/11 was certainly not the start of the conflict that now dominates all of our lives, the impact it has had on our society, including events here at Princeton, has become overreaching. I say it was not the start because one can trace what happened on 9/11 back to many other critical historical events from which it was spawned. And since he was the president of this university before he came to Washington as the president of the country, I'll start by recalling the famous Paris Peace Conference of Woodrow Wilson's time. Though called a peace conference, the result was anything but. Back then, the victorious Western powers essentially divided the defeated Ottoman Empire into many artificial nation-states and sheikdoms, which still remain today. Then, the legitimizing theme was self-determination, which of course was not really to be. Much as today, ad nauseum, but disingenuously, the themes are democracy and freedom. It's crucial to remember that at that time, the people of what we Westerners named the Middle East had been promised independence as an Arab nation, only to find themselves sold out by the secret British-French Sykes-Picot Agreement, and then confined in neocolonialism, termed mandates, and legitimized by Wilson's own League of Nations. That 1918 Paris Peace Conference turned out, in fact, to be the peace to end all peace. The subtitle, in fact, of Professor David Fromkin's remarkable book about that crucial period, which is the precursor to our own. Or in view of the current issues, today we could skip forward and start with the largely democratic and secular attempt to reform Iran in 1953, one which the CIA then undid, putting the Shah back on the throne until 25 years later a traumatized country threw him out. We, the United States, then took the Shah in. Iranian students then responded by sacking the U.S. embassy and taking hostages. And in a sense, their revolution then turned into our Reagan revolution and to today's Iran. Or we could start with the region-shaking '67 war, or for that matter, the U.S.-sponsored birth of Israel 20 years before that, or with Jimmy Carter's peace conference of '78, which also became a peace to end all peace. Because what followed was the assassination of Anwar Sadat, the Lebanese Civil War, the Iran-Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the invasion-occupation of Lebanon, which midwifed Hezbollah, the anti-occupation intifada, which midwifed Hamas, and which led to the era of suicide bombers that we're in now. The crucial point is 9/11 didn't come out of the blue and did have causes, and for many reasons and justifications, as much as American politicians and commentators refuse to discuss this backdrop and how the stage was set. Huge numbers of people, in total millions of Arabs and Muslims, had already been maimed and killed in this ongoing convoluted conflict laced with superpower proxy wars, Zionist and Muslim ideologies, corrupt repressive Arab client regimes, and the never-ending Israeli-U.S. occupation of the Palestinians. And let's be clear about this. Among the main reasons most American politicians and commentators don't talk about any of this and don't connect the vital dots that could lead to both understanding and conflict resolution is because most of those who are allowed center stage are either in the pay of special interest groups or have little experience with the peoples of the region and little serious knowledge of the culture and history about which they are so incessantly chattering. One of your own current history professors, one whom I just happened to grow up with in Duluth, Minnesota, a long time ago, has this to say, in an interview that's on his website, at the Princeton website, he has this to say. There are rules of the game in every society. We have to get inside a foreign culture and understand internally how it works. In 1940, we were confronting what we thought was fanatical emperor worship from the Japanese. They seemed to have no contact with Western civilization. They were inscrutable, incomprehensible. Today, we're describing our current enemy, Islamic fundamentalism, in much the same way. Whether it's good or bad, there are ways that Islamic fundamentalists see the world. To call them terrorists and fanatics is simply to say they're different from us and we don't understand them. But clearly, we've got to delve much more deeply. And so in the few remaining minutes, and I do have these prepared remarks because I thought this conference was so important that I should think through what I would have the one opportunity to say with you. So for the few remaining moments, let's try to delve much more deeply. And in a sense, I'll be summarizing my perspective on what I think has happened here at Princeton in the years since I've been gone, all, of course, in the afterglow now of 9/11. Some may still think that this is just a speaker's controversy here at Princeton, one which the recent 75th anniversary highlighted. But actually, it's far, far more than that. What has happened here at Princeton, I believe, is in the end the result of the serious and growing financial, political, and social pressures educational institutions now face in our country. Pressures which in turn largely determine what kind of people are put in positions of authority and what kind of decisions they're encouraged, if not forced by circumstances, to make. What has happened here at Princeton, all the more so since 9/11 it seems to me, is not by accident, but rather by design. Beyond the general pressures facing all major universities, you have today a Woodrow Wilson School fearful of losing a major part of its endowment, and as a result, courting power and money more than ever. For those of you who haven't seen the front page Wall Street Journal article today, that's just a fortuitous circumstance that happened. It had nothing to do with this forum. And yes, in my view...
Beforehand, you are right about that.
Well, I thought maybe the students were more powerful than I realized, but in my view, and with all respect to Dean Slaughter for the positive things she may have done here of which I may not be aware, Woody Wilson and Princeton are now playing big time, the big money and big power game. And it all comes at the expense of the rigorously independent intellectual and educational pursuits that should be foremost in mind, but are not. Furthermore, the person most responsible for choosing speakers, handing out awards, and selecting faculty in the past few years here at Princeton and at the Woodrow Wilson School appears to me to be using the university as a stepping stone to future personal and political power in Washington should that opportunity strike. Others have done so. The two that come to mind most are Paul Wolfowitz, who was at SAIS, and Condi Rice, of course, who was at Stanford. The major problem, though, is that when universities, the very places that are supposed to reflect independence of thought and analysis and true expertise, become so dependent on corporate, government, and lobby-connected largesse, then one of the major centers of honest education and knowledge in our society becomes severely compromised. That, in short, is what I think has happened here at Princeton, and most of all at the Wilson School. This situation cannot be remedied by a single forum or by inviting an occasional dissident intellectual like Noam Chomsky to give a talk. If you really want to remedy the situation, there are ways you can. But very frankly, I'm quite sure the powers that be are not going to allow this to happen. You could, for instance, establish and separately fund a special, maybe student-run program specifically designed to bring the very best independent academics, social critics, and expert journalists to Princeton from around the world. And you could and should make a point of bringing such people together at the same time as those who hold power. Then you will have your Socratic dialogue. Then you will have the world-class people at a world-class institution that can truly educate and discuss and debate the real issues of our time. But I stress the word independence, for the notion that the span of major guests should range from senior government officials to top personalities in the other mirror party competing to be senior government officials is really quite a ludicrous notion. Such a notion plays well in corrupted and lobby-infested Washington, but it shouldn't be allowed at a world-class university, especially with regard to major international issues. Because when it is allowed, not only are all of you students shortchanged at a very special and formative time in your lives, but all of us as a society are dangerously shortchanged for our collective future. For we don't need world-class universities to invite the very same power and money speakers and faculty that the government and lobby think tanks and political departments invite. There's already far too much of that. We do need universities to invite speakers and to engage faculty based on their demonstrated serious knowledge, expertise, independence, and critical thinking. It used to be much more that way. It doesn't seem it's that way any longer, certainly not here at Princeton, from what I've experienced, not only at the 75th, which I attended, but at the series of seminars that has been held in Washington for the past year. I also stress from around the world, rather than nearly always turning to those sponsored by or accepted by the powers that be in our country. For to really understand what is happening in our world, you have to both hear from and engage others who see things very differently and who are outside your own blinders and restraints. People who are not subjected to or controlled by the pressures for political correctness and advancement that now so dominate our society. Just from my own contacts, I can quickly think of people who could have brilliantly engaged and educated all in attendance at the 75th celebration. You may not know some of these personalities, which is just part of the problem, but I assure you they are all very much valued, respected, and in great demand throughout the world, even if not here at Princeton. Robert Fisk, Harold Pinter, Mohammed Hakel, Arundhati Roy, Mohammed Mahathir, Amira Haas, Nan Almagor, Haider Abdul Shafi, John Filger, Boutros Ghali, the list could go on. Indeed, for the 75th anniversary, where everyone was force-fed a non-stop diet of self-serving top government officials without even one single major independent academic or journalist or political analyst. Any of these persons I've just mentioned would have made an immensely needed contribution and in fact changed the nature of the proceedings. For there is a reason our current Secretary of State even now says she was so surprised by the Hamas electoral victory a few days ago. Right. Not to mention her insistence before Congress that no one imagined that anyone would use airplanes as they did on 9/11. The reality is quite otherwise, in fact. Many independent experts knew, predicted, and explained what was to come. She just didn't talk to them and didn't call on them. And when it comes to 9/11, no less a flag waver than Tom Clancy had written a novel that opens with an airplane diving into the Capitol during a State of the Union address. So just what kind of a self-isolating, apologist, and unaware world is Miss Rice, even now, living in? And there is a reason why Rice's predecessor, also recently honored here at Princeton, even after he perpetrated such a great historic hoax on all of us, the third anniversary, by the way, was 2 days ago. And I'm not using the term hoax as my own. Quote, I participated in a hoax on the American people, the international community, and the United Nations Security Council, unquote. That's what Colin Powell's own chief of staff at the State Department finally confessed in public just last Friday, in fact. The result of this, and many other cruel hoaxes coming from our government, is the dangerous polarization, dumbing down, militarization, and in some very troubling ways, the neo-fascist developments in our own society. This on top of the disastrous Iraqi invasion occupation, which has caused so much death and suffering, now cost nearly $500 billion, squandered so much American credibility, created so much more hatred around the world, and badly weakened and tarnished our military forces as well, once again. All of these issues should be seriously, vigorously, and continually discussed, debated, dissected, and analyzed at this world-class center of higher education. But instead, whatever the excuses, and frankly, these are not excuses that I find very credible. This reminds me of many forums in Washington where many of us just sit in the audience scratching our head at the things we're asked to believe about why things happened in the way we're told they happened, and then we find out when we have more information that's not quite the way it really was. So instead, we've been subjected to a parade of cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and generals, one after the other, all part of the same team, and all offered nearly a free ride. This is not, in my view, in the nation's service. It is in the government's service. This is surely not in the service of all nations. It is a very limiting and nationalistic approach which just further cuts off Princetonians from our world as it really is. And this parade of the powerful, financed by the special interests, simply does not reflect the real world we all must live in, and in which our country must now desperately find its way anew before it is too late. Thank you.